All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Turner, and today I'll be presenting on autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. I chose this topic because I believe understanding neurodiversity is super important in creating our future inclusive classrooms. So, whether you're a future teacher, which I think most of us are in this class, or a counselor, or even a parent, chances are you will work with someone or have worked with someone on the spectrum. But yeah, my goal today is to help you better understand what ASD is, what challenges students with ASD may face, and how we can best support them in meaningful and respectful ways. I'll also share practical strategies and examples to help you apply this knowledge in your future classroom settings. So, what is autism spectrum disorder? ASD is a neurological and developmental condition that affects how people interact with others, communicate, learn, and even behave. It's called a developmental disorder because symptoms usually appear in the first 2 years of life, but it really can be diagnosed at any age. So some individuals may be nonverbal, others might have advanced language skills but struggle with social cues. It's really important to remember that ASD is not a disease. It's simply a good way to think about it is that it's a different and unique way of experiencing the world. So, for example, to clear up this misconception, for example, a student might be really good at math, but they're going to struggle with social interaction and group discussions. So, understanding these differences is really what is going to help us support our students more effectively and more compassionately. So, why is it called a spectrum? I want to talk a little bit more about the misconceptions of autism. So, the term spectrum reflects the wide range of symptoms, skills, and levels of disability that people with autism might have. So, we might have thought that this is what it looks like, a spectrum rating from less to more, mild to more severe. This just simply isn't the case. It's a lot more complex than a single line of severity of less or more autistic. Instead, let's look over here to this color wheel. As you can see, it's a lot more complex and multifaceted than one over here. So, common characteristics you can see kind of along here are difficulty with social interaction, repetitive repetitive behaviors or hyperfixations and all of that. So, for example, one student or person may struggle with anxiety and have it really severe on the outer edge of the color wheel. But they could also be less sensitive to routines and the rigid structures that they're used to. So, understanding this is super important because not no two students may have ASD are the same. And so it's essential that we understand that everyone has their struggles and even their own strengths. So it's important that our support strategies reflect how complicated ASD really is. So here we have a little scenario, and we'll be learning a little bit about John. So John, a student in your class, has autism spectrum disorder. He does not like working in groups and can be overwhelmed easily. One day, the seating arrangement is changed without prior warning, and John has a new group. He is overwhelmed and refuses to participate during the lesson. He normally is called on for fact recall and is the go-to because of his amazing memory. But today, there was nothing, no response at all from him. So here's the question. What could you have done differently as the teacher? Maybe you could have given John a heads up about the seating change, or maybe you could have simply just given him an option to work alone. I really want you to think about how you would support John in this situation, how you would adjust your classroom routines. So I want you to take some time right now and take this moment to reflect or think about any ideas that you might have to address this. Going, this will be important to keep in mind throughout the presentation. These real life scenarios are really helpful because they can prepare us for inclusive teaching in the future. All right, moving on to the barriers to learning. So it's important to note that all students with ASD are different, but some of them might struggle to understand abstract concepts. So it's important to not use metaphors or figurative language, be over reliant on that because they might not be able to pick up on that. Group work can also be super hard for them because they can't understand all the social cues or communication as well. Sensory overload is another big one. Bright lights, loud noises, even just the texture of a chair can be distracting and even distressing. Changes in routine can also be super hard. This can cause a lot of anxiety and shutdowns, like how we saw with John before. So, as future educators and teachers, it's our job to recognize these barriers and find ways to reduce and remove them. So, for example, giving advance of schedule changes, even just offering alternative seating, and even using visual aids can make a huge difference. So I want you to think about your future classroom and how you might be able to help and remove the barriers that might be inherent in it. All right. So although it's important to understand the difficulties that people with ASD might face, it's also monumental to focus and bring out the abilities and the strengths that students with ASD might have. So, for example, they might have an exceptional memory and attention to detail. The people that I've known in my life and have grown up with ASD are just exceptionally brilliant. They are walking and talking encyclopedias. They are incredibly smart. For example, well, they might be able to memorize historical dates or even spot patterns that others might miss with their strong attention to detail. Another thing is that they can be honest and straightforward, for better or for worse. Sometimes they're a little too brutally honest, which can be a good thing, in my opinion. But they also really have a capacity for creativity. I know in my personal life, I know a lot of people with ASD that are just super creative and have a lot of outlets to express it, whether that's through art, painting, or sculpting, even thinking up their own fantasy worlds and stuff like that, which I think is really cool. So, also, another strength is their consistency and their rigid routines. I think that that can also be used for as one of their strengths, if gone about right, of course. But they also have a strong attention to detail. They're going to pick up on things that others might normally not. So I just want us to think about how we can design our lessons so that we can allow all of our students to showcase their strengths or their superpowers. So maybe that's through visual projects or structure and routines, or even just the option to do independent research. All right, accommodations. I kind of mentioned these a little bit throughout the lesson, but this will be a little more streamlined. So, what can we do? So, first, I think this is a really important one is to consider their sensory needs. Noise canceling headphones is a really good idea, I think. And even just providing quiet areas or spaces in your classroom will help your students with autism to stay focused. It's also essential to give your instructions clearly and concisely and highlighting the main ideas because sometimes they can get focused on the wrong things and go down rabbit holes, which is not always great. So you always want to make sure you emphasize the actual focus of the task at hand. Another good thing that we can do is by establishing predictable routines in the classroom. I think that's really key because if something is going to change, I think that the students need to know so that they can prepare for that in advance. Extended time and multiple options for completing tasks is also really important. Give students the option to write or to draw and use technology in whatever way they choose so that they can showcase their strengths. I think that is the most important out of all of these accommodations is to simply allow them to be themselves and give them space to grow and to utilize their own strengths. I feel like that's the best way that we can help them to grow. So, what other strategies have you seen or used that works well? We need to take another moment to reflect, or even just think about your interactions with people with ASD and how they can bless your life and the lives of others. So, yeah, more we learn from each other, better it is because we all are trying to create a more inclusive classroom for our future as teachers. And yeah, that concludes this presentation. I want to thank you all for listening. Here's my references, and I'm excited to hear what your feedback is and what your ideas are. And I hope you have a great day. Thank you.